Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban by J.K. Rowling. Ron caught up with them 5 minutes later in the tavern reached. Do you know what that... He called Snape something that made Hermione say, Ron! It's making me do. I've got to scrub out the bedpans in the hospital wing. Without magic. He was breathing deeply, his fists clenched. Why couldn't Black have hidden in Snape's office, eh? You could have finished him off of us. Harry woke extremely early the next morning, so early it was still dark. For a moment he thought the roaring of the wind had woken him, when he felt a cold breeze on the back of his neck and sat bolt upright. Peeves, the poltergeist, had been flowing next to him, blowing hard in his ear. What did you do that for? Said Harry furiously. Peeves puffed out his cheeks, blew hard and zoomed backwards out of the room, cackling. Harry fumbled from his arm alarm clock and looked at it. It was 4:30. Cursing Peeves, he rolled away and tried to get back to sleep, but it was very difficult. Now he was awake to ignore the sounds of the thunder rumbling overhead, the pounding of the wind against the castle walls, and the distant creaking of the trees in the forbidden forest. In a few hours he would be on the Quidditch pitch, battling through that gale. Finally he gave up any longer of more sleep, got up, dressed, picked up his Nimbus 2000, and walked quietly out the dormitory. As Harry opened the door, something brushed against his leg. He bent down just in time to grab Crookshanks by the end of his bushy tail and let him outside. You know, I reckon Ron was right about you, Harry told Crookshanks suspiciously. There are plenty of mice around this place. Ew.
Continue reading.
Go on.
And move there.
Sure.
Continue reading.
Куда?
Отак.
The noise of the storm was even louder in a common room. Harry knew better than to think the match would be cancelled. Quidditch matches weren't called off for trifles such as thunderstorms. Nevertheless, he was starting to feel very apprehensive. Wood has pointed out Cedric Diggory to him in the corridor. Diggory was a 5th year and a lot bigger than Harry. Seekers were usually light and speedy, but Diggory's weight would be an advantage in this weather, because he was likely to be blown, of course. Harry whiled away the hours until dawn in front of fire, getting up every now and then to stop Crookshanks sneaking up the boys' staircase again. At long last, Harry thought it must be time for breakfast, so he headed through the portrait hall alone. Stand and fight, you mangly cur! Yelled Cedric again. Oh, shut up! Harry yawned. He arrived a bit over a large bowl of porridge, and by the time he'd started on toast, the rest of the team had turned up. It's going to be a tough one, said Wood, who wasn't even at the team. Stop worrying, Oliver, said Alicia soothingly. We don't mind a bit of rain, but it was considerably more than a bit of rain. Such was the popularity of Quidditch that this whole school turned out to watch the match as usual, but they ran down the lawns towards the Quidditch pitch. Hats bowed against the furious wind, umbrellas being whipped out of their hands as they went. Just before they entered the changing room, Harry saw Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle laughing and pointing at him from under an enormous umbrella on their way to the stadium. The team changed into the scarlet robes and waited for Wood's usual pre-match prep talk, but it didn't come. He tried to speak several times, made an on-gulping noise, then shook his head hopelessly and beckoned them to follow him. The wind was so strong that staggered sideways as they walked down the pitch. If the crowd was cheering, they couldn't hear it over the fresh rolls of thunder. Rain was splattering over Harry's glasses. How on earth was he going to see the snitch in this? The Hufflepuffs were approaching from the opposite side of the pitch, wearing canary yellow robes. The captains walked up to each other and shook hands. Diggory smiled at Wood, but Wood now looked as though he had lockjaw and merely nodded. Harry saw Madame Hooch smile from the words, "Mount your brooms." He put his right foot out of the mud with his couch and swung it over his Nimbus 2000. Madame Hooch put her whistle to her lips and gave it a blast that sounded shrill and distant. They were off. Harry rose fast, but his Nimbus was swirling slightly with the wind. He held it as steady as he could and turned, squinted to the rain. Within 5 minutes, Harry was soaked to his skin and frozen, hardly able to see his teammates, let alone the tiny snitch. He flew backwards and forward across the pitch, past blurred red and yellow shapes, with no idea of what's happening in the rest of the game. He couldn't hear the commentary over the wind. The crowd was hidden beneath a sea of cloaks and battered umbrellas. Twice Harry came very close to being unseated by a bludger. His vision was so clouded by the rain of his glasses that he hasn't seen them coming. He's lost track of time. It was getting harder and harder to hold his broom straight. The sky was getting darker, as though night had decided to come early. Twice Harry was nearly hit another player without knowing whether it was a teammate or opponent. Everyone was now so wet and the train so thick he could hardly tell them apart. With the first flash of lightning came the sound of Madame Hooch's whistle. Harry could just see the outline of woods through the thick rain, gesturing him to the ground. The whole team splashed down into the mud. I called for a timeout, Will roared at his team. Come on, under here. He huddled at the edge of the pitch under the large umbrella. Harry took off his glasses and wiped them hurriedly under his robes. What's the score? We're 50 points up, said Wood. But unless we get the snitch soon, we'll be playing into the night. I've got no chance with these on, Harry said, expressly waving his glasses. At that very moment, Hermione appeared at his shoulder. She was holding her cloak over her head and was inexplicably beaming. I've had an idea, Harry. Give me your glasses, quick. He handed them to her, and as the team watched in amazement, Hermione tapped down with her wand and said, Impervious. There, she said, handing them back to Harry. They will repel water. Wood looked as though he could have kissed her. Brilliant, he called hoarsely after her as she disappeared into the crowd. Okay, team, let's go for it. Hermione spelled her down the trick. Harry was still numb with cold, still weather than he'd ever been in his life, but he could see. Full of fresh determination, he urged his broom through the unturbulent air, starting in every direction for the snitch, avoiding a bludger, ducking beneath Diggory, who was streaking in the opposite direction. There was another clap of thunder, followed immediately by four lightning. It was getting more and more dangerous. Harry needed to get the snitch quickly. He turned, intended to head back towards the middle of the pitch, but at that moment another flash of lightning illuminated the stands, and Harry saw something that distracted him completely. The silhouette of an enormous shaggy black dog, clearly imprinted against the sky, motionless in the topmost, empty row of seats. Harry's numb hands slipped on the broom handle, and his nimbus dropped a few feet, shaking his sullen fringe out of his eyes. He squinted back to the stands. The dog had vanished. Harry! Came Wood's ungarnished yell from the Gryffindor goalposts. Harry, behind you! Harry looked wildly around. Cedric Diggory was was spelting up the pitch, and a tiny speck of gold was shimmering in the rain-filled air between them. With a jolt of panic, Harry threw himself flat to the broom handle and zoomed towards the snitch. Come on! He growled at his nimbus as the rain whipped his face. Faster! But something odd was happening. An eerie silence was falling across the stadium. The wind, though as strong as ever, was forgetting to roar. It was as though someone had turned off the sound, as though Harry had gone suddenly deaf. What was going on? Then a horribly familiar wave of cold swept over him, inside him, just as he became aware of something moving in the pitch below. Before he had had time to think, Harry had taken his eyes off the snitch and looked down. At least 100 Dementors, their hidden faces pointed up at him, were standing below. It was as though freezing water had risen in his chest, cutting at his insides. And then he heard it again. Someone was screaming inside his head. A woman. Not Harry! Not Harry! Please, not Harry! Stand aside, you silly girl. Stand inside now. No, Harry, please, no. Take me. Kill me instead. Numbing, swirling white mist was filling Harry's brain. What was he doing? Why was he flying? He needed to help her. She was going to die. She was going to be murdered. He was falling through the icy mist. Not Harry, please, have mercy, have mercy. The shrill voice was laughing. The woman was screaming, and Harry knew no more. Lucky the ground was so soft. I thought he was dead for sure, but he didn't even break his glasses. Harry could hear the voices whispering, but they made no sense whatsoever. He didn't have a clue where he was or how he'd got it there, or what he'd been doing before he got there. All he knew was the average inch of him was aching as though it had been beaten. That was the craziest thing I have ever seen in my life. The scariest thing, hooded black figures called screaming. Harry's eyes snapped open. He was lying in the hospital wing. The Gryffindor Quidditch team, spattered with mud from head to foot, was gathered around his bed. Ron and Hermione also were, looking as though they'd just climbed off the swimming pool. Harry, said Fred, who looked extremely white underneath the mud. How are you feeling? It was as though Harry's memory was on fast water at the lighting, the grim, the snitch, and the Dementors. What happened? He said, sitting up so suddenly they all gasped. You fell off, said Fred. Must have been, 50 feet? We thought you died, said Alicia, who was shaking. Hermione made a small squeaky noise. Her eyes were extremely bloodshot. But the match, said Harry. What happened? Are we having a replay? No one said anything. The horrible truth sank into Harry like a stone. We didn't lose. Diggory got the snitch, said George. Just after you fell, he didn't realize what had happened. When he looked back and saw you on the ground, he tried to call it off. Wanted a rematch, but they won fair and square, even Wood admits it. Where is Wood? Said Harry, suddenly realizing, чому ми крутимось?
Because Snitch said that.
Перестань крутитись.
Do it.
Still in the showers, said Fred. We think he's trying to drown himself. Harry put his face to his knees, his hands gripping his hair. Fred grabbed his shoulder and shook it roughly. Come on, Harry, you've never missed a snitch before. There had to be one time you didn't get hit, said George. It's not over yet, said Fred. We lost by 100 points, right? So if Hufflepuff lose to Ravenclaw and we beat Ravenclaw and Slytherin, Hufflepuff will have to lose by at least 200 points, said George. But if they beat Ravenclaw, no way. Ravenclaw are too good. But if Slytherin loses against Hufflepuff, it all depends on the points. A margin of hundreds either way. Harry lay there, not saying a word. They had lost. For the first time ever, he had lost a Quidditch match. After 10 minutes or so, Madame Pomfrey came over to tell the team to leave him in peace. We'll come and see you later, Fred told him. Don't beat yourself up, Harry. You're still in the best teacup we've ever had. The team drooped out, trailing mud behind them. Madame Pomfrey shut the door behind them, looking disapproving. Ron and Hermione moved nearer to Harry's bed. Dumbledore was really angry, Hermione said in a squeaking voice. I've never seen him like that before. He ran onto the pitch as you fell, waved his wand, and you sort of slowed down before you hit the ground. When he whirled his wand at the Dementors, shot silver stuff at them. They left the stadium straight away. He was furious they would come into the grounds. We heard him. Then he magicked you onto a stretcher, said Ron, and walked up to school with you floating on it. Everyone thought you were... His voice faded away, but Harry hardly noticed. He was thinking about what the Dementors had done to him, about the screaming voice. He looked up and saw Ron and Hermione looking at him so anxiously that he'd quickly cast around as something matter-of-fact to say. Did someone get my nimbus? Ron and Hermione looked quickly at each other. What? Said Harry, looking from one to the other. Well, when you fell off, it got blown away, said Hermione hesitantly. And it hit, oh, Harry, it hit the Whomping Pillow. Oh, the Whomping Willow. Harry's insight lurched. The Whomping Willow was a very violent tree which stood alone in the middle of the grounds. And, he said, dreading the answer, well, if you know the Whomping Willow, said Ron, it doesn't like being hit. Professor Flitwick brought it back just before you came around, said Hermione in a very small voice. Slowly, she reached down for a bag at her feet, turned it upside down, and tipped a dozen bits of splintered wood and twig onto the bed, the only remains of Harry's faithful, finally beaten broomstick.